everyone. Welcome to Open Mind Night, a show that talks about everything mental health and mental illness related. I am your host, Robin Tamanaha, licensed marriage and family therapist. Joining me on this episode is my guest, Dr. Sunny Ho. He is a licensed psychologist who is currently practicing in a group private practice in Seattle, Washington. The group practice he's mainly serves BIPOC and LGBTQA plus individuals. He graduated with his Ph.D. in counseling at the University of Iowa in 2020 and completed his pre-doctoral internship at Rutgers University Counseling Center and postdoctoral work at Seton Hall University. His clinical interests are around international students and immigrants, mental health issues, acculturation, and family of origin issues. Hi, Sunny.
Hi, Robin. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, how are you? Thanks for being here.
Good.
Yeah. So before we get started, I have a lot of questions about all the different topics. But first, could you tell the listeners or the viewers a little about, I guess, your personal or professional journey, what led you to be a therapist and work with the populations that you do?
Sounds good. So, hi, everyone. Good to see everyone here. And I identify as a cisgender, straight male, and also a first gen immigrant from Hong Kong. And him pronoun. And I think to answer your question about what brought me to therapy, I think it started in the journey of going through undergrad. I'm actually part of the counseling center paraprofessional program when I was actually an undergrad in University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And I'm lucky enough to kind of really reach out to a lot of cultural center at that point, doing a lot of workshops, seminars, and also some type of prevention work with different minority groups. So at that time, I just feel myself kind of doing all the outreach work, and also doing a lot of work related to mental health awareness. So at that time, I actually kind of have a really good mentor back then. Is a professor at U of I, Illinois, and I actually kind of grew my interest into counseling psychology. And then I decided to kind of move on to my master to do a lot of work with social justice issue, multicultural issue in Teachers College, Columbia University, to get my master degree in New York City before going to Ph.D. So I think throughout this journey, I really center my interest and passion around multiculturalism, racism, sex and sexism, and all those kind of ism, to kind of really doing a lot of work with minority groups to advocate for their right, and also kind of really kind of gathering their own information to kind of really help them along the way, to kind of really kind of guide them how to kind of really assert their rights in the United States. So that's actually how I actually get a lot of experiences and also interest in counseling, and also being particularly kind of myself as an international student. And I think that that journey by itself, I actually share with my international students group from, throughout my past training. And also getting to this point, I just really enjoy doing that work.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your journey. I think I always get so excited, when I meet fellow Asian therapists. I know how important it is too for the community, right? The Asian community to, have, therapy, have also Asian therapists or AAPI therapists, and you brought up the international student aspect, and I feel that's a really important population because from the little that I know, at least here, where I am in Southern California, we at the community college level, there's a lot of international students. I think people aren't necessarily aware of that. And so having access to mental health, and also with a professional who truly really understands, I think is so important, because that's I mean, to come here to go to school that's a lot.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's really unique. And people usually in the United States overlook this population because we sometimes kind of really teach them the US culture and US systems, but we didn't actually kind of really get them oriented to kind of the basic knowledge of how to get food, how to get your kind of set up your bank account, or All those kind of basic things has not been like really acknowledged for international students. And I think a lot of times that because they feel really anxious coming to another country from different culture, from different like upbringings, and sometimes like people are not aware of like the uniqueness and also the nuances among this population.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So much, you
Yeah.
know. Could you talk a little bit about like
Mhm.
just that international identity, kind of what
Yeah.
that means?
Sure. Yeah. So it's really broad. Like the definition is really broad. Like international student is actually one of the identity. People come to the United States with an F1 student visa, and go through like colleges, and the US government actually expected you to kind of return home like after your study and getting a degree. So that's the F1 visa. Like someone would actually like to kind of stay longer, like maybe getting an OPT, optional practical training afterward, or also like H1B, a working visa in the United States. And that's actually another group of international identity professionals that actually work beyond like getting the degree. And someone actually come to this country just for a semester or a quarter for like J1 visa, like as a scholar or like kind of visiting scholar, to just like kind of really stay here for a year or really temporarily time to really kind of exchange the knowledge with the local scholars. So that's actually another type of international kind of population. I would say like people like maybe born in the US and went out for a degree like outside of US and coming back in for like to be a professional. That's another international kind of person that we need to kind of look into. Like sometimes people maybe spend like a decade or 15 years, 20 years outside this country, coming back, returning home to the United States. And sometimes like those kind of culture shock or like changes. I mean, like there are a lot of things evolving like every single day in the United States. Like sometimes people need to get adjust back to that kind of routine of being a US citizen. And I think like talking about international population is really broad and like really kind of vary across the board. I would say like, yeah, we need to be really mindful of people uniqueness and also like what are their identities. And don't forget, like there are a lot of intersecting identities as well, like being international, like what kind of cultural background that you raised from, like maybe like what continent that you're from, or like that's actually something that we need to kind of really pay attention to.
Right. There's
Yeah,
so many layers. There's so many
exactly.
layers to
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah. And I would also picture too, like how it's a gift, like that identity can very much
Hmm.
be a gift in many ways, right?
Exactly. And sometimes we didn't actually value like the gift of speaking different languages. Like when I was just thinking about the gift, like that's actually something that I didn't realize until I got to like maybe first year or second year of doctoral program, that like one of my mentors actually speak to me back then and saying that like, do you know like speaking different language in the United States is actually a gift. Like not everybody around you actually have this talent, like kind of speaking different language. And I always frame like people like in the international student population in particular that always thinks their identity is a deficit, and also like having themselves feeling they need to assimilate, they need to kind of blend into the culture and forget like and kind of wash away their own like kind of roots. Sometimes I do a lot of work with like reclaiming that identity and also like embracing that identity and just like kind of doing a lot of empowerment liberation in terms of what you want at that moment is really crucial. Like how do you show your identity genuinely without losing it? Yeah.
Yeah. And I would wonder too, like how helpful, I think when you had mentioned, this came to mind, being increased awareness, right, for this
Mm-hmm.
population.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned sometimes like there is that, like they get overlooked, but having like allies through this also for them that may help along the way.
Yeah, yeah. I would say having allies and doing work by like kind of showing up your identity in different spaces, in different settings, and sharing your cultural background with different people is actually a good way to go, because sometimes it can be hard. Like, I mean, like of course, like sharing stories or sharing a background to a certain extent. Like if the if the other person actually asks you to kind of repeat your story over and over again, of course it would be exhausting. And at that point, like I mean, like for us, like as an international student, we don't have the obligation to explain every single little things to people around us. But like if you're willing to kind of step in to just really talk about your story kind of genuinely, and I think that would actually create some like cultural exchange and cultural kind of conversation. And I think that would actually help you to show up your identity more in different settings. And of course, I aware like power dynamic, like if you have to speak to your boss or speak to your manager or your supervisor, it can be hard. So having an ally, having someone who shares similar background with you in the team may allow you to kind of practice and also like have some confidence to how to kind of show up yourself more openly.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the next thing that comes to mind is because like to me, I think of like that as like a really great resource, you know, to have. Are there any other particular like resources that are helpful like for international students?
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually leading some of the mentorship program within my division, like Division 17 in APA, for instance, actually counseling psychology division. I actually have some mentorship program allowing some middle to late career kind of professional to kind of really guide international students or early professionals to really guide them through the process of like, I mean, if you actually have some like concerns to share, like you can actually have a one-on-one session with your mentor. I think that would be a really good resource, like for the long run. I would say like to have a mentor to really guide you through like the steps that you need to go through, maybe like after you graduate, what is your career path after that? And like, not to say that like you have some kind of maybe immigration status you need to take care of, but like also like there are a lot of things that you need to like navigate in the system, maybe in an academia setting, like after you graduate with a PhD. There are a lot of different things that international students face. And I think having a mentor that guide you through different steps, every step that you move forward, I think that would be a really good. And also like some of the division and also like all association actually have healing circle, like maybe sit in some like international students healing circle to talk about your concerns, like just be yourself. And I think being yourself as an international student is actually really essential, like because maybe we're so blinded with our work, we're just like not showing our true self and not really kind of be vulnerable. I mean, like it's hard to be vulnerable, like with colleagues and also in a work environment. But having those channels, having those spaces would be helpful.
Definitely. I like how it's called healing spaces. That's really great.
Yeah.
Have you and I think that's like wonderful. Like, and as Asian, as I'm Asian American, even like as Asian American, like the topic of feelings or kind of sharing things, or in some case that is being vulnerable in a way, and in opening up, certain things like aren't so much talked about, like maybe with their family of origin or like ancestors, like even values even, but there's so much like importance in doing that, especially coming here from another country. There has to be just so much that they're experiencing internally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's another layer, and that's another nuance that I'm talking about. It's just like kind of besides being an Asian in this country, there's another layer of being international. Like you need to kind of figure out your day-to-day life, like because you're not used to the system. Maybe you come from a system that healthcare is actually universal, like for every individual, like in that region. And then coming to the United States, so much different, like in terms of how we work in the healthcare system, and also like maybe navigating in the school system or educational system, like it's so different. You need to be really proactive to learn. Like sometimes if person coming to this country, like feeling shy and not really kind of having the resources to really be proactive, they would certainly feel lonely and anxious, like kind of moving forward. Like there's no support within that kind of maybe organization that actually provided like ongoing resources or ongoing support. And sometimes international students certainly feel depressed and feel anxious after that.
Yeah, understandably, because it sounds like there's so many different components and along the way in their journey, even like post-graduation.
Yeah.
Sounds very stressful.
Yeah, it's really stressful because like it's not, I mean, unless your program or your department actually really prioritize your international student status. But sometimes like in a lot of programs, international students being the minority, like sometimes it's really hard to kind of have an ongoing support. Like faculty doesn't really sometimes aware of the uniqueness and also like the nuances what international students has to encounter every single day. And sometimes check-in maybe like for domestic students, maybe like you can be monthly, but like international students may need more support than monthly meeting. So like I think it would be helpful for professionals to be aware of meeting like maybe like with the international students more often, or just like kind of in a different schedule if possible. Yeah.
Definitely. I almost picture too, like when I think mentor, I think like paired with someone, and how great that
Yeah.
would be, even if it's like kind of like paired with someone along the way, someone that's like
Yeah.
consistent too. That'd be really cool, because there's so many things to touch on, and I can't
Hmm.
imagine like the legal aspect of it
Right,
too.
exactly. Yeah, the legal aspect is huge, and not every professionals, like besides immigration attorney, know how to do like with legal stuff. But I think a lot of times that like a lot of faculty doesn't actually have the experience of dealing with immigration, kind of related rules and policies. Sometimes I would just like kind of, yeah, I mean, the best way is to actually refer to the international student office, or even like kind of finding some resources, maybe attorney to can really consult with the international students, because I think the majority of concerns, I mean, like the international students that I encounter, like most of them actually have concern with legal concern. And I think that it would be really helpful to, I mean, there's some channels that I know, which I can share later, that actually like kind of helping you to find ways to consult with an attorney. I think that would be really helpful, because you can't do this alone. Like being an international student, you feel really lonely already. Like you can't really do everything on your own, basically.
And it's such like a complex system to navigate as it is,
Yeah,
and then also the healthcare. Like there's so many
yeah,
different
yeah.
pieces to the puzzle, and each of them have their own like intricacies and ways that it works or doesn't work, and how to go about it. Like it can be, sounds like it could be very, very overwhelming if it was
Hmm. Hmm.
alone in it.
Absolutely. And the stigma is huge. I mean, like what you say about, I forgot to touch on, is actually the mental health stigma. I think I mean, at least like within the Asian international population, there's a huge stigma talking about mental health with their own parents, with their own relatives. And I think that like a lot of my colleagues, or even like kind of people around me has an international student status, and just like kind of finding so hard to find an outlet. Like if you don't find a therapist yourself, and you don't have a good like kind of stable support network, like you will eventually kind of find yourself in a really kind of lonely and miserable place, because there's no outlet around you, and parents not supportive talking about emotions, and it could be really difficult, I would say, for a lot of AAPI international students. Yeah.
Yeah, and kind of like reconciling that, right? Because now they're in this place and space, even maybe a very supportive space, where they have the opportunity to be seen and heard and talk about
Hmm.
their struggles and what they're going through, but then kind of reconciling that with like it's different than what they're used to and what their family's been doing. It's
Exactly.
very interesting for them,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And sometimes, mm, I would say like the thing that like I always enjoy doing is actually figuring out a creative way to do therapy with international population, because I would say a lot of different cultures have their own way of healing. So maybe not language, maybe not like kind of using words or verbalized emotion, maybe drawing, maybe painting, maybe sketching, maybe using a lot of drama therapy, or like doing a lot of different things to really have the person to really kind of get out of their emotions. I think it will be helpful, because I think in a lot of American way, and how we teach, how we are trained, how we are actually taught, like from the American westernized context, is so white centric. And I think a lot of times that we forget about the cultural aspects, and also
yeah,
like how can we do a culturally responsive treatment to that particular person.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And that there's so many other ways to move through the healing journey and
yeah,
process, or
yeah,
even processing things other than like the talk therapy, right? Which
yeah,
is very
right.
much white,
Yeah,
Western
yeah,
centered.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. When we think about how to combat white supremacy, or like decolonize like therapy, the first thing that I always remind myself, and also kind of having a lot of conversation with my colleague, that we need to be aware of how much westernized theory we actually imposing in the therapy process, but forgetting what the clients actually need from you as a therapist. Yeah.
Right. I think and this is just like kind of maybe my personal opinion, but like I think in some ways therapy is kind of an art, like we get to be
Hmm.
creative and we get to, which is such like a plus, I think, to be able to pull in different ways of healing, different ways to be in this space together rather than just the rigid like talking.
Yeah.
I think it always, that kind of makes it a little more fun too, in a way, like
Hmm.
being able to do it a little different and creative, and doing that collaborative process like with the clients and where they're at and what works for them, and
Hmm.
moving through it that way. I think that's really cool, actually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that like it, yeah, just kind of thinking about what is more, I would say like client tailor, and also like kind of client tailor kind of treatment plan, and also like kind of treatment goals for the client. And also like you mentioned really kind of interesting thing about like therapies and art, because I have some mentor actually mentioned to me recently about like therapies and art, because sometimes we can actually be more creative. Like art is just like kind of a really good way to describe like how therapy can actually do it different ways, and also different styles. And sometimes like maybe talk therapy is not the only to go effective kind of therapy. And yeah, people have to be open to try different training, and like as a therapist, we do a lot of continuing education and also train ourselves to be more well-rounded, to be more holistic. I think that's actually in the professional side, I think it's really help. Like, I mean, like it's really useful for us to be more equipped with different skills.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, whether this be for the therapist listening or others who may be interested in therapy as an Asian or Asian American,
Uh,
I know you touched on, like, other than talk therapy, there's like a few types of styles that can be incorporated into therapy. And I think, and I'm asking this because
yeah.
I know some people may be like unfamiliar with therapy in general, or what like it kind of could look like. So you mentioned like the art therapy, psychodrama, when it
Yeah.
for Asians and like, even international students included,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
are there any others that you've noticed, like, oh, that one like was really cool to pull in, or that one was brought up and we brought that in the room and that was helpful? Does that kind of make sense?
I went through quite a few training related to art and also psychodrama therapy. And one of my friends from master program actually owned like kind of a psychodrama therapy organization agency in New York City. And she has done a lot of work by, I think it's actually incorporating some kind of trend and also culture in China, that people actually go into a scene and actually acting out correct character. And also like kind of using their own language, using their own emotions to act out that character. And sometimes like acting out process and performing, and also having interaction with other actors and actresses in the scene would actually help you to really figuring out how to regulate your emotion. And I think really interesting, I actually witnessed that like on the stage, and it's really powerful. Like people cry, people would just like have a lot of different emotional kind of ups and downs at stage. And I think at that point I just realized that like it's just not talk therapy. Maybe like in a drama therapy, maybe you don't have words to describe, you just like use your emotions, use your own body language to communicate your emotions. And sometimes that's actually more powerful than using like kind of verbalize our emotion, or using words to describe how we feel. Because every language actually translate differently in terms of feelings for. Like there's no one direct translation. Like for instance, like depression, anxiety. In other culture, maybe those words have been uh, I think maybe there's maybe tons of words like kind of describing anxiety. That's actually how we describe in the Western culture, that anxiety is meaning you feel fearful of something, or like you feel like kind of afraid of something. But like in other culture, maybe there's like kind of different layers of language describing that, and not just one word to describe it all. Yeah.
That is so cool, especially that like psychodrama like
Yeah.
aspect of it.
Yeah.
I think that
Yeah.
is so neat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Psychodrama, like sometimes like you will, I mean, like of course, like I've went through something, maybe you use words to kind of like act out that actor, or like kind of that script. But in some training, I think like people actually just use motion. Like words is not allowed. Like you cannot talk like in that drum like kind of scene. You
Yeah.
just use motions, you just use your own body language to come like to really express how you feel internally. And I think both ways actually work, but I feel like if you yeah, I mean, it's just so powerful, like to kind of really witness the whole from the start to the end, and how people actually really have a lot of powerful emotion experience. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's the whole body experience too. I mean, you could
Yeah.
really get
Right.
into it,
Yeah.
even without
Yeah.
any words, and just like your positioning, your
Right.
face, like I picture like the physical movement of
Yeah.
what they're
Uh-huh.
describing or
Yeah.
feeling. Like that's like that is definitely sounds like such a powerful experience.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really
It's so magical. Like I just feel like so magical. Like when you actually sit in, like as an audience, like to witness that happen, like from start to end. And I think, yeah, I mean, if people can actually like experience that and witness the power of that, I think that would be a awesome thing to do. Yeah.
yeah, and to go there, like
Right.
like
Exactly.
because you're acting it out, or you're doing this, so like I keep saying the word powerful because that's what comes to mind, but
Yeah.
like to be able to get in that place where you're just like release,
Yeah.
and you just feel
Absolutely.
all of that and do all of that.
Right. Yeah.
That sounds super healing.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Is there anything I didn't ask about that you'd want to bring up or talk about?
Let's see. Yeah, I think one thing that I want to kind of touch on is actually like what I actually encounter a lot is actually a first gen or even second gen generation immigrants coming into my room actually kind of have a lot of conflicts with their parents,
Yeah.
because there's a lot of like huge kind of values conflicts. They don't actually align with one another. And sometimes I like as a therapist, I do a lot of like kind of personal value sorting. I use a lot of like acceptance commitment therapy work, kind of incorporating my own therapy process, just like helping them to figure out what is actually crucial, what are some of the priority values that they want to kind of show and represent themselves in their family system. So sometimes like working within the family, I think is interesting, and you actually get me excited like to kind of talk about family dynamic, because a lot of Western and also like kind of American culture like always saying that like just cut off the relationship, you don't need to kind of talk to them, but like it doesn't actually work across the board to Asian families. And a lot of times that I would actually kind of find some practices, some skills, kind of base training with my client, just to kind of figure out what works best for them at that moment, to just like really embracing their own identity and also their own values.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
love ACT. ACT
Yeah.
is great. And you brought up like values, like
Yeah.
values, right? So
Yeah.
for like the listeners and the viewers, like goals are
Yeah.
like things you can check off a list, right? You could do it complete,
Yeah.
done. Whereas values is what brings your life meaning, and that you can engage with and do whether or not things are going a particular way in your life. You can always live according to your values. So and values work, especially with an ACT, is so powerful. And I would think too, and you can let me know, but I mean, is that when you bring this up to these clients, like, is that their kind of first experience with the possibility of engaging in values or identifying their values?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of times that because Asian culture always value harmonious, like being harmony, like being balanced in terms of chi, like kind of like the positive and negative energy in the family. So like we don't bring up conflict. So once I actually bring in conflict, so like there's another mix in the therapy process, just helping them to realize, okay, so they can actually figure out their own values, their own meaning of life, basically. So they can actually help them to really navigate and also communicate that out, because they don't realize before coming to therapy that they can actually have their own set of values, they can have their own set of commitments in life, which I think the family maybe is constantly suppressing, maybe constantly kind of not allowing, not encouraging to speak up about their mind. So in therapy is actually a good way to kind of have a corrective experience to kind of help them to really figure out what works best for them. So maybe they end up like kind of figure out a plan that they don't need to kind of cut off their family ties. So that's actually how I work with my clients in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Yeah. How does it work when it like so when they identify theirs values and they get in touch
Yeah.
with their own,
Yeah.
what does it look like within the family context? Do they end up just kind of sharing it or not? Or how does that kind of come into the system
Hmm.
or not?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Like sometimes I would, I mean, it's depend on the timing, depend on the client readiness of sharing that. Sometimes I need to kind of have some practice, like how does that feel like kind of owning that value and just like kind of communicating with me as a therapist and just like kind of gradually kind of bring it up to their family members, because family members can be really kind of scary for a lot of clients, like coming into a room, like to kind of share their own true self. So I would help them to kind of find a way that they can actually share some part of themselves, like not, I mean, like if they don't feel like sharing the full part of themselves, they can share some part that they feel comfortable at that stage of their life, so that they can actually do it gradually, not forcing them to do it like completely at one time. So that's actually how I do like acceptance work as well, like to kind of really see through those feelings of discomfort and like being vulnerable and also like being it's okay to be not okay, those kind of stages. And I think it's really interesting work with especially with first, second gen immigrant, like having different values with family members. Yeah.
It sounds very empowering too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And important, so important. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
If the listeners or viewers want to find out more about you, is there anywhere in particular they could go or contact info for you?
Yeah, I mean, like the best way to contact me is actually through email. My email is sunny@interconnectionshealing.com. And Robin, you can actually feel free to share with the listeners and kind of post it on the description. And I'm really open to kind of chat with anyone that actually need any resources, support. Then I can actually share resources, yeah, with the link, or like kind of like find some ways to kind of share resources with Robin, and everyone actually, every listener can actually have it.
Yeah, great. So what I'll do is I'll put your contact info in the show notes and then on the YouTube. And
Hmm.
then, yeah, go ahead and send over if you have any particular links that you feel may be
Yeah,
helpful for the listeners
yeah,
or viewers.
yeah.
Go ahead and send it on over to me. And then I'll also include that. That way they can just like
Sounds
click.
good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
Well, thanks so much for doing this and being here. This was really helpful. Really helpful.
Thank you for having me, Robin.
Yeah, no problem. Take care.
Yeah, thank you.